John Bryan there live for us here tonight, getting us the latest from Novant, and we don't know at this point. We were 2 officers wounded, as best we've been told right now. Which hospital they were taken to, John, we don't know. We haven't been given that specific information. We haven't been given their condition at this point. I think it's pretty clear they were preparing just in case, right? We know there was still an active situation that was going on in that neighborhood, where obviously lots of rounds of gunfire were squeezed off there this afternoon, so they didn't know how many more could potentially be injured or were already injured on scene. So they were just being ready, just in case they had to clear paths again to get to the hospital. Now that that part has cleared, some of those officers are beginning to pull back there as well.
And Carl De La Guerra, our security safety expert, here with us as well. And Carl, you made a point while ago off camera, and that is this. Explain this situation. High profile. Everybody's watching this. It's a terrible situation. We're seeing gunshots. We're seeing officers wounded and killed. But police still have to go about their everyday activities today, the driving down the road, stopping the speeders, issuing traffic citations, doing other investigative work. How does that impact the officers when something like this happens?
Terribly. Police officers are human. Can you imagine that people you've worked with for years are dead and have been shot at, or possibly you were part of this event and you're being told, back out on the street. You got to go back out into your area and do patrol. It takes a certain discipline. A lot of officers have faced this, maybe not to this degree, but have faced this in the past. You learn how to handle it over time, but only time teaches you how to mitigate a situation like this, to return to some sense of normalcy in your job as you go out there and have to maintain a professional demeanor after going through something like this. You can imagine how hard that would be.
So I would suggest to folks who may have any kind of dealings with police officers as well, understand that as well. I know the community is hurting as well, but knowing the brotherhood, the sisterhood of law enforcement and all, it deeply, deeply impacts them.
Please be kind.
Yeah.
To the police officers.
No question. It's been, some time since we've dealt with this, in Charlotte, certainly to this degree. Clark and Shelton officers several years back certainly come to mind here in Charlotte. I think it was 2021 we had an officer wounded here in Charlotte.
Nobles and Barnett.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
And we don't know, we should make perfectly clear which department these officers, the local ones, were from. So we were still waiting for confirmation on that. Perhaps we'll learn more at 5:40 or so about when we expect to get a news conference from CMPD. What you're looking at here is some of the video that was taken in a property and a home kind of right behind where all of this was going on. It was past that tree line that you get into another yard, and that was the house where all of this unfolded here today on Galway Drive in East Charlotte. Again, if you're just getting home, we're just past 5:30 right now. To reset as best we can for you right now is that we have 3 officers killed today. There was an arrest warrant that was being executed there on Galway Drive. It was the U.S. Marshal Fugitive Task Force that was handling this. That's multi-jurisdictional. U.S. Marshals involved, many other departments involved as well, provide officers to that task force. They were serving this warrant there this afternoon. We were told by a witness there, the gentleman who lives behind that home, that he heard a call for the person inside to come out of that house, or dogs were going to be sent. At that point, gunfire, lots of gunfire was heard in that area, and that is where we've had the sad news today that 3 officers were hit in that gunfire and killed this afternoon. At least 2 others have been hurt. Their conditions unknown, John.
And you can see, this is new video we're showing you here. You can see officers with weapons drawn. They're pointing their weapons. Appears to be in full tactical gear there. And Carl, if you could explain what is, you see these officers, it's almost like camouflage they're wearing there. When you say they're in this tactical gear, what type of equipment do they have with them in a situation? There you see one looks like he has a backpack on.
These officers that we're looking at here, notice how they're standing in one position. They have been posted there on a certain level of the perimeter to maintain that area of safety. They are all around that property at that point. None of us were there, but rest assured, these officers are heroes. It says a lot that this situation could have got so much worse with the number of rounds that were fired out there, and that speaks to the professionalism of all first responders to this, police, fire, EMS, that it didn't happen worse than it did.
You
can be thankful for that.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. You described it as a firefight earlier. In fact, we can show you just a little bit of video where you can hear exactly what that sounds like. That is video that was shot at Tyler Wilson's house. Again, this was the home kind of right behind where all of this was unfolding today. He told us it was around 1:30, 2 o'clock this afternoon. He was just at home working from home when he heard all of this happen there today. And you could hear a couple other adults who live in the house screaming for him now to take cover, get inside, get into a bathroom. And it wasn't long after that that officers began to fall back and actually come through his home to start to establish that perimeter, to widen it out, as obviously all heck was breaking loose.
And he said that one U.S. Marshal Service person came in and actually had a rifle and set up a sniper position in a bedroom there. I guess part of that perimeter Carl's been talking about there too. He said, Tyler also said he believed that he saw officers pulling another officer along the grass. He seemed to be injured in some way, but it wasn't sure whether he'd been shot or whether he may have just been injured as they were going across a fence that separated the yards there. He said that fence is destroyed. There were multiple officers going through his yard. He also said that they had set up a command post outside in his front yard, but they had asked him, they had told he and the other two adults who were in his home to stay inside the home, and he was doing exactly as they said, at the same time looking out the windows and trying to give us information. And again, as Jamie just said, you know, he had heard what appeared to be hundreds of rounds of shots fired. Then at one point it was like an hour went by and he didn't hear any gunshots, and then just a short time later he heard what, maybe 10 or so shots that were fired. And after that it appeared that the police officers, other law enforcement personnel, were going into that backyard. They had their weapons out but not pointed, or did not seem to be prepared to fire. They were going in there, and he said then he saw some officers, from what he could see, it looked like they were in the backyard of that home and were in a more relaxed stature there. I don't want to say relaxed, but did not appear to have their weapons drawn and ready to fire at any moment.
I think that the threat level, I suppose, at that point maybe had dropped some, and that's where they were feeling that they had neutralized the suspect at that point, which we have heard from CMPD that has happened. Again, you're watching some of this video here, and Carl, as you were describing it, right, it's a firefight at that point. I mean, you can train for these sorts of things, right? And they obviously do a lot. But once it starts happening, once the bullets start flying, it's hard, isn't it?
It absolutely is. You're never truly prepared for something like that. You're in the moment. You respond as you have trained, like we were talking about earlier. In regard to the police officer going into this adjacent residence and setting up a sniper position, that doesn't surprise me, because in these type of situations, officers are going to want to gain that tactical superiority as quickly as they possibly can in any way they can.
Well, it's a wooded area too, right? There are plenty of places to hide. Somebody could have come out of that house. Are they in that wooded area? You've got to think about all these things.
As soon as the bullets start flying, there's so many unknowns.
Yeah. And the other thing, though, too, Carl, is I think the police officers, the marshals, have to be so careful. The person inside the home shooting, he's shooting indiscriminately. Doesn't matter where the bullets go, whereas the police officers, though, have to think about, well, other officers are on the other side of the house. The bullets can go through the home entirely.
Very easily.
Got this perimeter, so the police officers are constricted by the very fact that they have to be careful that they don't wound another officer or someone else out there.
A police officer is responsible and accountable for every single round that comes out of their firearm. A criminal couldn't care less.
And we've learned there's two other people who are in that house. Their connection is we don't know, but they had to be mindful of that as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
we don't know what's on the other side of that wall.
We do
exactly
not
right.
know.
It's almost 5:40 is when we were hearing that a news conference was going to happen. If that happens, that's what, just over 30 seconds or so from now. We're waiting to find out if that's going to happen on time. If not, hang with us here. Obviously, as soon as that news briefing happens at the command center that's just outside of where all this happened in East Charlotte, certainly you're going to see it live right here on WBTV, and we'll get a little bit of information, John. Quite honestly, CMPD has given us a lot throughout this day to try to keep us up to date as best they can through all of this, a very fluid situation. You know, they've got their PIOs, public information officers, doing their best they can, and that's the balance that, you know, they're trying to strike, right? They've got an operation going on while trying to keep the community up to date as best they can.
And safe.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's the purpose of the public information officer with these agencies, is to be able to give the very best, most most information they possibly can without disturbing the integrity of the investigation. And they're doing it quite well today, obviously.
Yeah, and so they're saying, though, that there's still going to be some roads in that neighborhood, in that area there, that will remain closed. So they're asking folks to please remain patient and to please cooperate with officers there. They're going to be on the scene there. As Carl said, this is going to be an active investigation now into exactly what happened. You may see police tape, that yellow caution tape up around the area there. I know that in typical other situations where there have been shootings, they'll trace every shell casing that's on the ground, every shell casing that may be inside the home. They'll be looking for other evidence. And again, we don't know what this warrant was in regard to or who this person was. And so we have to assume, though, that they would be looking for evidence in regard to the warrant that they were serving. Right, Carl? So a lot of different pieces involved here.
Absolutely. And is this connected to anything else? I mean, that's one of the questions that they're going to want to answer right away. Was this an isolated incident, or is it connected to something else that's going on in the city, regionally, or nationally? They're going to want those answers right away to understand what they're dealing with here.
And we don't know, we should point out, too, whether this person, this suspect, died by his own hand, or was it, through, shooting back and forth with officers. That part is still to be
That still needs to be answered.
Still to be answered. When they go through this, you're talking, they want to try to account for every shot that was fired there today. How do you even begin that process? Because it's such a scattered area. Is it a grid? Is it a step-by-step, walking in a line? How are they doing
The shell casings, the location of the shell casings are going to tell them a lot. The spent shell casings, directions and angles. The best thing to go off of is the understanding that a bullet travels straight. So when that projectile left that firearm, it's going to have a path, and that path will be followed. Somewhere that bullet will end.
A lot we're still waiting to hear, obviously, the details to all this, John.
We were expecting, the police put out that they would be doing a news conference at 5:40, and it's a couple of minutes past then. Certainly, we give them all the time in the world because they're trying to put together a very complicated, difficult situation. So they're trying to meet the deadlines that they've imposed on themselves, but if they don't, we understand completely that it's going to take some time to get these things together. But when they do have this news conference, we expect to get a lot more information. Perhaps we'll learn who this person was that they were serving this warrant on. They were saying earlier in a tweet from police that they were serving a warrant on a subject, which would indicate one person, although we know there were at least 3 people in that home. So we don't know whether these other 2 were suspects or whether they were involved in this warrant. We don't know who these people were at all. Even Tyler was saying that he had never met the folks who were there and in that home, although he believes that if it's the home we're speaking about, that he'd seen that they'd had some parties at that home there too. But otherwise, he said as neighbors, he never had any issues with them whatsoever.
Live pictures here. You were saying this is where that briefing is going to happen here shortly. That is the Mayor Vi Lyles in the yellow sweater that you see walking up as well, and with the others to their back. I can't quite make out who that is.
Can't tell who that is.
But we'll wait and see who is going to speak at this news conference. One presumes we are going to hear from the mayor, the police chief, perhaps others. We know Governor Roy Cooper is en route to Charlotte. Whether they're waiting for him to arrive, we're not sure at this point. One piece of information, and I'm not sure it's entirely new. Carl, you help me out here. It says it just got confirmed that this was a fugitive warrant operation. What does that tell you?
Which means that they were going to go serve a warrant on a known fugitive. As we had mentioned a few minutes ago, this individual was a fugitive from justice. He knew the police were coming for him at some time. He was prepared.
And what he was a fugitive of, what the charges were that he was facing, again, unclear at this point. We don't have names. We don't have any of that at this point. But we'll get those here in the next few minutes at this briefing. We will have to wait and see. We haven't dealt, like I said, we've talked about this a few times, right? We haven't dealt with this in Charlotte in a number of years, thankfully, and sadly we are today. So we're trying to piece this all together as best we can for you at home as well. And we are getting ready, again, for this news briefing to happen. And John, we're just giving some more information. You've been able to decipher it?
This is the latest from CBS News confirming this and reiterating what we know, basically. The U.S. Marshal Service confirming that one deputy U.S. Marshal has been shot and killed during a fugitive warrant operation in Charlotte. Several other Marshal Service task force members and local officers were also shot and wounded. We cannot confirm the number of officers wounded or their condition, although we know from other confirmation that 2 officers were killed. we refer you to Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, which is conducting the investigation. The matter's still active and ongoing, and we are withholding the name of the deputy pending the notification of family members. So that's
yeah, someone's tasked with that just awful job, right? Of having to go knock on someone's door tonight, Carl. Those are tough.
One of the most dangerous jobs in law enforcement is serving a fugitive warrant. The individual knows they're a fugitive. They know that you're going after them. Time is on their side. There's precautions that can be taken, but it's never 100% on any of these. One of the most dangerous jobs in law enforcement.
Played out here this afternoon, sadly, as we have seen here today. You're looking at some of the video from the scene there as officers were responding, as Carl was pointing out, setting up that perimeter around this property where this was all centered today on Galway Drive in East Charlotte. An old school Charlotte neighborhood where just a lot of families live. You got big old trees, you know, got ranch homes, you got split level homes. People working from home today. School buses were about to start rolling in this area and everything just came to a stop. And this police presence responded to this neighborhood. There you see the addresses and the cross streets that we're talking about here. That scene has now been cleared as far as folks who were in the lockdown position, who were ordered to stay home in place. They can now leave as that scene has been cleared. Obviously, a big investigation is still going on around that home itself, so steer clear. Let officers do their job. The last thing they need is a bunch of looky-loos coming around and looking right now, so let them do their jobs. They're obviously not only investigating but grieving as well, as we are here in the community for these officers that we lost today, and we're again waiting to find out exactly what jurisdictions those local officers worked with. We were told now about 5:50, I believe it is, for this news conference, so now about 3 or 4 minutes away. Obviously, when that happens, we will bring it to you just as soon as we can.
And I was just checking too. Mia Goodwin was the last Charlotte-Mecklenburg police officer we lost in the line of duty. That was back in 2021 in December. You may remember she was directing traffic on I-85 there at Harris Boulevard. There had been a wreck. Another vehicle came through and hit her. So it's not just a situation like this where there's gunfire involved. It's all sorts of different situations. Here, Officer Goodwin was killed as she was directing traffic out there. It's a very dangerous job. We see the gunfire and we think, oh yeah, that's the only thing officers have to worry about. But there's so much more they have to be concerned about, because you just never know what type of situation they'll be involved with.
A new mom, right, who had just returned back to work after maternity leave, right? Her husband, a firefighter. Yeah, like we were talking about earlier, there is no routine in this job. You would think working a traffic accident would be routine. There's no such thing, as was demonstrated in that sad, awful case. And obviously, as Carl was pointing out, serving a warrant like this is about as dangerous as it gets for these officers, and they know that going in, and that's why they train, and they prepare for every eventuality. But Carl, as you mentioned, you don't know what's on the other side of that door.
No, you absolutely don't in serving a warrant. Serving a warrant ranks up there with the danger of a traffic stop. And as common as you think traffic stops are, they are absolutely one of the most dangerous things an officer does. I would say serving warrants and traffic stops, two most dangerous things out there. You know, the police have been a focal point today. However, let's not forget the brave men and women of Medic and also of the Charlotte Fire Department that responded out there. This is not something that they deal with every day either, and the trauma of this and that extra thing of knowing that this is a brotherhood and you have got to do everything you possibly can to save lives. There's a survivor's remorse on medical personnel that have to work on a deceased individual.
That's a great point too. Charlotte firefighters and medic, they're not armed. They're going to the scene, you know, to save lives or pull lives and get them, you know, to hospitals and things like that. But yet they don't hesitate. They go.
And they're not wearing the vest. And they're not wearing the tactical gear. They're out there fully exposed when they're out in that situation there. So they're just as much heroes as the police officers who are armed and out there working.
You can imagine how it would feel without having any protection and hearing hundreds of rounds being fired and knowing that at some point it's got to be you that goes up there to start saving lives.
Yeah, they stay there.
As we were mentioning, because they had to try to somehow get these wounded out of there while this was all going on, because you know this really didn't come to an end until what time? Shortly after 5 o'clock, I guess it was.
Shortly after 5, yes.
You know, when all this started between 1:30 and 2 o'clock. So, you know, to try to get wounded out of that scene, that is just heroic. I don't know what other
It's a very tough situation
for them to try to do that is amazing work.
And it appears that the press conference is getting underway, so we're going to go to that live and let you hear it in its entirety.
No, you're good. Big Chief. Big Chief, you said it. Oh, sorry.
All right, we are waiting for that news conference there to get underway. They are getting themselves in position. That is Mayor Lyles right in the middle of your screen in the white shirt. Screen left, that is the police chief, Johnny Jennings. Right next to him, in between Mayor Lyles and the chief, that is the district attorney, Spencer Merriweather. So we are expecting to hear from several people here as part of this news conference. Looks like they are about to begin. Let's listen in.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kevin Petrus. I'm a lieutenant with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department here in Charlotte, North Carolina. I appreciate your patience this afternoon as we have worked through the situation that we've been dealing with today. There's no doubt that our Charlotte community has experienced a tragedy today. And it's one that, as a law enforcement community, we always know is possible, but we never expect. It never gets easier. We're going to do our best to answer your questions today, to provide details, to be transparent about the events of this afternoon. But I do implore you to understand that we're dealing with a tragic loss of life today. And that loss of life is very fresh. There's details that we do not know. There's questions that we frankly just aren't going to be able to answer. We will take your questions. But first, the chief of police for the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, Johnny Jennings, is going to come and give you some information and share his thoughts. I'll spell that for you. Johnny is Johnnny. Last name is Jennings, Jennings. After Chief Jennings, the mayor of the city of Charlotte, Vi Lyles, is going to come and share her thoughts. Vi, V-I, Lyles, L-Y-L-E-S. Chief.
Thank you, Lieutenant. Today's an absolute tragic day for the city of Charlotte and for the profession of law enforcement. Today we lost some heroes that are out to just simply trying to keep our community safe. I'm going to try to go through a series of events of how this all occurred and played out, and then tell you a little bit more about the injuries and the things that we had to endure today as a profession and as a city. So about 1:30 p.m. this afternoon, the U.S. Marshals Fugitive Task Force went to the 5000 block of Galway Avenue in an attempt to serve a warrant on an individual for possession of firearm by a convicted felon. When they approached that individual, they were met with gunfire. Officers returned gunfire and struck the victim, who was later pronounced deceased in the front yard of the residence. As officers approached that individual, they then received additional gunfire from inside of the residence. So after a long standoff, we were able to clear this residence and confirm that there were 2 additional people inside. They were both brought to the police station as persons of interest, and we're trying to determine now what exactly occurred inside of the residence. Tragically, there were 3 members of the U.S. Marshals Task Force who were pronounced deceased, and there were 4 CMPD officers who were shot, one being in critical condition, who is now in the hospital fighting for his life. A total of 8 law enforcement officers were shot by the suspects in this house. So we are very early in the investigation. CMPD will lead this investigation. We still have a lot to uncover, a lot of questions that are not answered right now. So please respect the fact that I won't be able to answer some of the questions that you're going to have. But at the same time, we are going to diligently work on this to ensure that we bring a respect to these officers and these law enforcement officials that lost their lives today. And this is a good example of what we try to tell people every single day, that when we put on this uniform, that we don't have any guarantees that we'll return home. But yet we have a lot of great men and women across this entire country that do it every single day to make sure that you're safe in your communities. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mayor Vialaus, so she'll want to say a few words. I'm just going to put this mic down.
You never know what your day is going to be like. You can't plan things like this to be in this space at this time. We've lost 3 people. They lost their lives after they gave us the opportunity to be in a safe place, and they lost their lives. These are people that care deeply about what they've done for a profession, and now today we have to say to them how much we are grateful for what they have done. We won't know very much about what happened until their investigation is done, but I know this about our community. Our community stands up for people. They stand up for all of the people that work for us, that make it possible, all of our officers. If you had a little bit of problem driving around today, I don't think anybody was too worried about that, because we know that there is a reason for this, and there's a reason that everything happens, and sometimes we don't understand it. But at this point, I know that this community will seek understanding. I know that our police department will seek understanding. I want to say this. We're very, very much grateful. Today I heard from the White House about the loss of our officers and the situation that we were having to adjust to. I've heard from Congresswoman Adams as well as Congressman Jeff Jackson. On the way over here, the Speaker of the House, Tim Moore, and the President of our State Senate, Phil Berger, they all talked about what can they do to help us. Now, we may not know what help we need right now today, but we do know that when people reach out to say this is something that is important that has happened, and they want to be a part of whatever we do, because there will be a time that we will commemorate these people that lost their lives. You think about it. Your father, your husband, your friend, your neighbor, all of them were one person like that. And today they're not going home. You know, 3 people lost their lives today. And the most that I can ask of our community is that we honor and respect them for all the work that they've done, all the work that we will do to make it possible for our city to be safer. Every one of us wants to be in a situation where you get up this morning and get to come back home. And someone didn't today. Keep your prayers, keep your faith. Make sure that these officers who have families have people to reach out and hold them up, because they will need this. And we are a city that will make it possible for them to be this way, to be able to live and know that we honor and respect the loss that they have. Thank you very much for this time.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to take just a moment just to clarify. There was a total of 4 CMPD officers that were struck by gunfire today, and 4 task force officers. So that's a total of 8 law enforcement officers who were struck by gunfire today. I want to take a minute to recognize the people standing behind us here today. The first responder community, the government organizations that stand behind me. This is a community within the community. And it's incredible, the bond that we have, and it's demonstrated in no other way like it is in moments of crisis and in moments of tragedy like the one that occurred today. So to recognize the people that are with me today, we have the Charlotte Fire Department, Medic, Department of Homeland Security, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Department of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, U.S. Marshals, Mecklenburg County District Attorney's Office, North Carolina Highway Patrol, and I sure hope I didn't leave anybody off the list. But for on their behalf, I want to thank you for being here, and on behalf of all the men and women that they represent who answer the call, especially when tragedy strikes, I want to thank them. Any questions that you have, Chief Jennings and Mayor Lyers are available.
Chief Jennings, you mentioned that these marshals were serving a warrant for a convicted felon with a weapon.
Yes.
Knowing that they're going into a situation where they know that someone has a weapon, how does that change the way that they respond, if at all?
Well, it certainly changes the response. The question is, how does it change the response when you're going into a residence where someone has a history of having a weapon? And let me just be clear, the U.S. Marshals Service, their fugitive task force is comprised of surrounding agencies. So there are multiple agencies that are involved with the fugitive task force with the Marshal Service. The Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department is a member of the U.S. Marshals task force as well. So anytime you are dealing with someone who is a convicted felon and who has been caught previously with a firearm, it does raise concerns and raise awareness when you are responding. So when they do that, part of the reason the task force is such an imperative part of what we do every single day is because they have extensive training and they train together to be able to deal with these kind of situations. It's always going to be something that's on the forefront of their thought process when you're going after Charlotte's most dangerous people. And unfortunately today was something tragic that we never want to see. I never want to stand in front of you today to talk about an incident such something this tragic. It's really heartbreaking. Yes.
Chief Jennings, U.S. Marshals one deputy.
You know, I'm not ready to tell you all of the agencies. What I can confirm is that 4 CMPD officers were shot. 1 CMPD officer is in very critical condition at this point. We do have to make sure that family members and all of them are notified, so I'm not going to release which agencies they were with the task force. So the question is the number of shooters. Right now, we believe there are 2 shooters involved. Again, we have 2 people of interest at the police station that are being questioned right now. And we have confirmed that the individual that was set up, that we were serving the warrant on, was the individual who fired the initial shots and was deceased in the front yard at the end of all of this. So,
besides the one in critical condition, how did the other 2 officers do?
The other officers, besides the officer that's in critical condition, the other officers are stable. The degree of injuries are varying, anywhere from a graze wound to a wound that requires a little bit more attention, but they are stable and expected to be okay.
And can you say if any of your officers who are shot in this, were they responding patrol officers? Were they SWAT officers?
Yes, I can confirm that we do have a sergeant who is assigned to the task force who was on the scene. That officer immediately called for help. The 3 officers or the 4 officers that were shot are officers who were responding to the scene.
Chief Jennings,
I'll get to you. Yes, sir. Yes.
scene, can you just tell us what firearms these suspects had, and when you were able to get into that house, were there any other firearms found?
That's still early to tell. Right now, we're still doing the investigation in the house. I can tell you it was a high-powered rifle that was involved on the suspect end. Yes, sir.
First of all, my thoughts and prayers are with you and
Thank you.
U.S. Marshals. What can you say about the bravery of the officers who responded to the scene, knowing that their brothers and sisters in blue were actively being shot?
Thank you for that question. So the bravery of our officers that responded to the scene, knowing that they're going into gunfire, is what I've been saying for many years, is in the face of danger, our people step up, and this profession steps up, and that's what we should be defined as doing, because they knew what they were going into and still held their own in attempt to apprehend this suspect. They knew that they had officers that needed help, that needed to be extracted from that location, yet they went in, some getting shot themselves as a result. So the bravery, the heroism, everything that goes down with that defines what our profession is, our people demonstrated that today, and I couldn't be more proud of the response. I couldn't be more proud of the partnerships that we have at every single level of law enforcement, every single level of public safety. I can't say enough about the phone calls, the text messages, the support, and as you heard Lieutenant Petrus say, or the mayor say, that a lot of it is, what do you need? How can we help? And it just, in times like this, that's exactly what we need in these situations.
Chief, in terms of other surrounding areas, law enforcement agencies, can you talk about how many maybe from other counties helped out or federal law enforcement agencies helped out?
Yeah, so the question is how many other agencies are with the Fugitive Task Force or just responded? So the Fugitive Task Force, I don't have the exact numbers. With Charlotte has one member on the Fugitive Task Force as a sergeant, but mainly the surrounding agencies within our surrounding cities and towns are members of that, and we can get you those numbers exactly who is involved.
That actually helped out responding to this, whether it was providing repair cab or whatever.
Yeah, so the officers who responded to help out, all the federal agencies were on the scene with me, and state agencies. The Mecklenburg County Sheriff's Office was there as well. We had agencies from Pineville to different towns within our county. They sent officers in to answer our calls for service, because we obviously, you can imagine the manpower needs that it was to secure that scene and to do the transports. So they were very helpful to ensure that we did not let our citizens down in responding to those calls for service, and they were very helpful in that. So.
Did you have children in the house at the time of this, while the warrant was being served?
No children in the house. There was one juvenile that we did get out of the house, though. Yes.
You said the suspect used a high-powered rifle. Can you provide any information on what type of ammunition was used by the suspect or suspects?
Not right now. The type of ammunition, that's still part of the investigation. All of that will have to be looked at as far as when we get into the house. Also recover any projectiles that might have been taken out as treatment to the officers. So there's a lot that we still have to uncover. We're not there yet.
Chief, can you speak to
the choice of the time to execute this warrant, given that there were schools in session? Was that taken into consideration as to whether this was an appropriate time?
So the question is whether this was an appropriate time to serve a warrant. I will tell you. Hold on. I will say, when you're talking about a felon who has propensity to carry a firearm, there is no great time to do it, whether it's in the middle of the night or in the middle of the day. The interest in the Fugitive Task Force was to ensure that this person was brought to justice and taken off the streets, and unfortunately he decided that he was going to respond to that by gunfire at our officers. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any prior histories or calls regarding this place of residence?
I do not right now, but the history of this residence, the history of the individual, all of that will be released very soon. We're going to try to get that information out. We do have a lot of family notifications that we have to make in order to provide more information to each and every one of you about this individual. So. Yeah, so the question is right now, is the shelter in place open? Is the area okay to go back to normal duties? Yes, we're going to be at the residence processing the crime scene probably for several hours. But as far as the lockdowns and closure of roads and all of that, we have opened that back up. The house has been secured, by our officers, has been cleared, and now comes the tedious task of ensuring that we collect the evidence and process the scene. Yes.
You said one suspect was shot in that front yard. You mentioned there were two more people inside that house that are now in custody. Are one
Yes.
of those two people the additional shooter, or was there a second victim, or one of those suspects?
Yeah, so the question is about the two other individuals who came out of the house later. We can't I can't confirm right now which one or if either are the suspects in the additional shots that were fired. What I can tell you is that we had the house secured, and the perimeter was secure. And we continued to take gunfire from inside the residence. And after we cleared the residence, there were only 2 individuals that came out, one 17-year-old juvenile, and then another female who was taken out as well. So
just to confirm, there is only one suspect that is deceased.
One suspect is deceased, yes.
Chief, do you know, and I hate to ask this, do you know if this is the deadliest law enforcement day in Mecklenburg County or Charlotte history?
I cannot. I've been with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department for 32 years. I can't remember an incident where 3 law enforcement officers were, and also 3 that were killed in the same incident, as well as 1 in critical condition and additional that were shot and injured. So to me, it's the most tragic one that I've been involved in. I don't know historically. I can't imagine that there's one that's any worse than what we're seeing today.
Chief, what are the questions that your investigators will be working to answer in the coming days, weeks, months?
Well, a lot of the questions that need to be answered, we don't even know what those questions are right now. We have to get a full understanding of why this occurred. And also to uphold the integrity of the investigation, we want to make sure that we check all the boxes that we need to so that we can get a full prosecution in this case if and when it comes down to that. We know some answers, but we still have many that we have to clear up and many that we have to continue to work on until we can really lock down what happened, who was involved, and move on from there. So. I did. I spoke with the governor earlier today. He basically asked me, what do I need? He's here to support. Certainly appreciative of the phone call with him. Unfortunately, I know he would be here if he could right now. He's on his way to come and speak with us, but I did speak with him this afternoon.
Chief, while our prayers are for the families and the community, I am a East Charlotte resident since 1975. I appreciate what the police officers do in our community. Speaking on behalf of the East Charlotte community, I'm prayerful that there will be an increase of the police presence in our area, in East Charlotte.
Yeah, thank you for that. At this point, I'm concerned mainly with taking care of the officers, taking care of their families, and all of that comes into play later on how do we respond to this community. But want to make sure the community knows that we're going to continue to keep them safe. We got a lot of brave men and women out there that are going to continue working in that neighborhood, and they're going to continue to work in the best interest of our community and our citizens. So yes, I'll take 3 more questions. Yeah.
Of the CMPD officers who responded and were injured, how many of those officers were part of the U.S. Marshals task force, and how many were responding to the shots incident?
Okay, all of the officers from CMPD that were injured were responding to the scene. The one sergeant that we have assigned to the task force was not injured. Yes. I don't know how many total officers were there serving the warrant, so I don't have that. That's from the U.S. Marshals task force. That they had a contingency of their task force out there doing this warrant service. Yes.
Speaking. My condolences for you and the police force. I definitely feel like this is a bad, tragic situation that should never take place. In regards to law enforcement and just citizens throughout the state, what can you say could be a beneficial step that can be taken between relations between police enforcement and whether it could be just citizens, felons, or whatever the case may be? What could be done to bridge the gap so a level of this situation will never take place?
Well, I'll be honest with you, whatever gap there is, this level should never get to this place, right? I mean, you can have all the hate in your heart that you possibly can have. That should never result in taking a life, and much less taking multiple lives. So the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department and every agency you see behind me has a priority to continue to make sure that we have the best community relationships that we possibly can but a lot of that also means that we have to be met halfway on certain things. So we're going to continue to do that. And like I said, we're going to continue to keep your community safe. So thank you. That's all I'll answer for now. So thank you.
Thank you all for being here. We do need your support, and we do need your prayers, both for our officers and the other officers involved, and for their families, and for those impacted in our community in other different ways. So stay tuned to CMPD Public Affairs, our social media channels, and press releases.
News conference they're wrapping up this afternoon. Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Chief Johnny Jennings doing most of the talking here today, trying to give us the best information he can at this point, with the understanding that there's a lot still to sort out about all that happened here today. And we'll get to the facts and the figures and the numbers, but when he mentioned, in the face of danger, our people step up. He was talking about his officers who came, the 4 CMPD officers that were wounded there today, were just, as Carl was talking about earlier, just responded. They heard the call, John, and they went, and they became victims of this gunfire today.
It's just
that part, just the human part of this is what we can't lose track of.
All right, our chief investigative reporter Nick Oxner is there at the scene where this news conference is being held. And Nick, tell us what the scene is like out there and what you've heard and your take on this.
Yeah, John, I'd describe this press conference that just wrapped up seconds ago as somber, powerful, emotional. I think the general message from CMPD Chief Johnny Jennings being this is bravery, and this is what we mean by the heroism that our CMPD officers show every day when they go to work. He said it best, that officers showed up and ran towards gunfire, responding to what they knew to be an active shooting situation. So let's recap what we just heard from the police chief. A total of 8 law enforcement officers shot today. 3 of those officers are dead. They were executing a warrant as part of the U.S. Marshal Fugitive Task Force. We know one of them was a deputy U.S. Marshal. The other 2 were task force officers from outside agencies. Those agencies have not yet been identified. A 4th task force officer with the Marshals also shot but survived. We also know 4 CMPD officers were shot. 1 of them is in critical condition. The other 3, Chief Jennings says, are stable, suffered everything from graze wounds to other minor gunshot injuries. Mayor Vi Lyles also addressing the press conference today, saying that Charlotte is a resilient community that will gather around in times of need. It's also notable, we saw City Manager Marcus Jones on scene. Now, he stays out of the spotlight. He stays behind the scenes typically. This might be the first time I've known the city manager to be at a press conference, which is telling of just how critical today is. Other important, notable folks at this press conference, including the head of the FBI office for North Carolina, the district attorney, Spencer Merriweather, SIA, Charlotte Fire Department, basically every law enforcement agency that you could think of in town. So a lot more to unpack as we go forward, but that's the initial scene here, is just reverence, respect for those who gave their lives today, and the heroism of those who ran towards the gunfire in that house. From what we now know, according to Chief Johnny Jennings, 1 suspect dead in the front yard of a house who fired the initial gunfire, and then the chief said another suspect inside that house who fired more shots to those additional responding officers. But 2 people taken from that home are now at CMPD headquarters being questioned. But again, a lot more to unpack here. I want to go to my colleague Ron Lee now, who's standing by closer to, we want to go to my colleague Siobhan, Brian, who's standing by here, who's been anchoring our field coverage all afternoon.
Yeah, Nick, we're still out here outside of the Novant emergency room, and the situation here is significantly quieter. You can see a couple of lone police cruisers that are still parked up on curbs here in the area. Down near the ER entrance, still a couple of officers occasionally seen walking around. The scenes around our local hospitals are much quieter as we, of course, look ahead to what's next now. And as Nick was just sharing with you, we now know much more information about what happened in today's tragedy. We know that the governor and other elected officials are now rallying around Charlotte, around Charlotte's police force. But now there are families who will have someone missing at their dinner tables this evening, and that's what we now have to focus on. You've heard the mayor say it, you've heard the police chief say it. We have to show so much respect and reverence for these men and women in blue, because now they're mourning one of their own teammates who were just trying to serve and protect the rest of us. And again, there's so much that we need to learn about this. There's so much that we have to find out about those 2 additional subjects that are being questioned as we speak. But again, we have to wrap our arms around the men and women in blue this evening, and those families who are now missing a loved one, who are just trying trying to do their day job and help make Charlotte safer. Now I want to toss it to my colleague Caroline Hicks outside of Atrium, Maine. Caroline?
Well, something that stood out to me is when Mayor Vi Lyles said we lost 3 heroes today, and I was thinking about it. You know, when tragedy strikes the police department, it doesn't mean they can stop doing their job. They were still out here across the city knowing that something was happening with their own men and women, and they were out here blocking streets to try to make sure that if ambulances needed to get through here, that they would be able to do so. And hours later, you can see here on the grounds of Atrium, Maine, there are still several CMPD vehicles out here, parked out here. It's a lot quieter at this hour than it was earlier today, but you still see a police presence at this hour. And Mayor Vi Lyles also mentioned, you know, she appreciates that people in the Charlotte community are patient as we had to work through a lot of that traffic that we saw today. It has since reopened. So earlier today, we saw that Kenilworth was at a standstill. At this point, it is back open. But again, you know, just thankful for the patience of everyone in the city as they worked on this investigation, and of course just devastated for our partners in law enforcement who are suffering the losses of their own tonight. We know at this point that at least 3 are dead, and again, they are still working throughout the day. We are hearing sirens right now. They're still out in our community, so again, showing so much support and respect for our law enforcement agencies as they work through this. We'll continue to bring you updates as we get them. Back to you.
All right, thank you, Caroline. Our Caroline Hicks there live, along with our Siobhan Bryan, Ron Lee, and our Nick Oxner out there. And I think it was very just how tragic this is. Police Chief Johnny Jennings has been in law enforcement for more than 30 years. In regard to officers being killed, he said this is the most tragic situation ever. He has never seen anything worse in his 30-plus years of law enforcement.
A tragic day for Charlotte, a tragic day for law enforcement. We lost heroes, is what he said today. We can point out, I'm not sure it was said in all the coverage as we wrapped it up, in case you didn't hear from the beginning, that the suspect in all this, that triggered all of this, that brought the officers to that scene today, was wanted on a charge of possession of firearm by convicted felon, and that's why they were trying to bring him into custody. They knew he was armed and dangerous. They knew that this could be a potentially awful situation when they went into it. They did their best to prepare for it, but they went anyway. And we bring in Carl De La Guerra. And Carl, as we were watching all of this here unfold with that news conference today, and you heard it over and over again, these 4 CMPD officers, they weren't part of the task force. They just heard the call, and they responded.
Exactly. When that call goes out on the radio, officers need assistance, shot fired, officer down, your world speeds up exponentially. The last thing on your mind is your personal safety. What is on your mind is playing through that scenario on your mind, what you might be arriving at, what your actions are going to be. You try your best to slow time down mentally. And then you arrive on scene and you have to make decisions instantly. Do you go one way? Do you go the other? What do you do? And you know that you're going into a bad situation.
And it was a bad situation. They arrive at the home. They approach a suspect wanted for felon with a weapon, possession of a weapon. He opens fire. Police officers fire back. He's killed, and then someone inside the home begins firing shots at the officers as well. And eventually, when the scene was cleared, 2 people were in that home, a juvenile, a 17-year-old male, and a female. So we don't know who was firing the shots from inside the home, but certainly there is much more to come on this investigation.
One thing we heard described as a high-powered rifle was involved in this. That's not clear. I didn't quite pick it up if that was the original suspect. I think it probably was, as opposed to the people inside the house as well, whoever was firing that shot. So that was kind of the firepower that our officers were dealing with. And Carl, one thing, too, somebody asked the question in here. In the middle of the day, they go in, and the chief pointed out there's no good time to try to execute one of these kinds of warrants.
Absolutely not. 24 hours a day, it's wide open. That suspect knows, especially as this individual was a wanted, fugitive, he knows the police are coming for him. It's just a matter of time. There's no good time of day to do one of these.
It's just a sad thing, and to know that they go into this, and a lot of folks say, well, they know this going into the job when you become a police officer, this is going to happen. That does not at all lessen the impact that we have lost 3 people. Families are going to be suffering because of this, and it's just a very, very tragic situation. We do know that the mayor has talked with the White House today in regard to the situation here. The governor of North Carolina, Roy Cooper, is coming to Charlotte to be with police officers and to get more information for himself as well.
A lot to learn about all of this. The chief, made that very clear. He kind of almost indicated there, if you read between the lines a little bit, that there's a lot more to know about this person who they were looking for here today. And they're just not in a position quite yet to share all that information. But he did make it sound like it wouldn't be too terribly long, John, that we would learn some of that information. And that's the thing, Carl, they know this guy. They know who he was. They know what he was capable of going in, right?
Absolutely. He's a fugitive. They have a good background on him. They have a solid background on him. They know what he's doing. But then again, that human element comes into play. You don't know what he's going to do. And
did they know there's 2 other people inside that house, one also armed? You know, those are really difficult questions to answer going in.
Very difficult, but we can be glad and thankful that this occurred in a somewhat contained area. Can you imagine if this would have occurred in a mall, if they would have done that takedown in a mall or on a freeway or something? I mean,
yeah.
You know. All right, well, we are going to wrap up our coverage for now, but there are still many more questions, still many more answers to come in regard to this, and we're going to be gathering that information throughout the rest of the afternoon and into the evening.
The CBS Evening News is coming your way next. Our Nick Ochsner, in fact, will be reporting on this story for the CBS Evening News, so stick around for that. And we'll see you at 7 o'clock for an update on everything that's transpired today. Thanks for watching. Thank you.
Storm 3, WBTV's First Alert Mobile Weather Lab, taking you inside the storm. Sponsored by Scott Clark Toyota.
There was a time when sunlight turned the earth into a gallery, when gardens displayed masterpieces under delicate